social media platforms. Let's get into a Kickstarter conversation. You would say that we've talked much about this, but until you hear the Morning at 10 TV version, of course, with one special guest that you have this morning. Now, we're looking at the marches have always been used to mobilize people around the world, especially against stronger opponents, from Martin Luther King's March on Washington to Mao Tse Tung's, of course, a great march that changed China, and now President Museveni's trek. Now, of course, one of the stated objectives of President Museveni's, of course, 195-kilometer trek to Birembo in Kakumiro was the desire to educate the so-called Bazzukulu, or the new generation born after his successful rebellion, about the sacrifices he and his comrades made for the peace that they now enjoy. Unfortunately, it was sharing the news space with a Muzukulu called Bobi Wine, who is trying to energize his presidential bid by doing cross-country consultations, which we know how they're going. Now, joining me this morning to have this particular conversation is Mr. Mwambutse Ndebesa. He is a lecturer at Makerere University, a lecturer of history and development studies. It's always a pleasure to host you right here on Morning at 10 TV. Good morning and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank
You're well?
You. Good morning to the viewers and listeners.
Good morning. I think, let me first take your views before we get and, break down the reason as to why we first had this trek and if at all it achieved its intended purpose. What do you make of this trek? Of course, coming just a month after the anti-corruption walk that we all saw.
Oh, thank you. Just a few minutes ago, you did say that the stated objectives of the trek. So there are the stated objectives and the unstated objectives. The stated objectives you have just pointed out, but there could be unstated objectives. But by and large, I think all these marches and walks are statements which are for political mobilization. It was political mobilization.
You think so?
I think so. Otherwise, what was it for? Anyway, politicians normally don't do things which do not have political logic. So I see this was a move, a walk for political purposes. It is not the first time. I think this is the second or the third time. It's a ritual, and like all rituals, they are meant to enhance something. So in this case, I think it was to enhance political support for him and the party. And
if you think that was the key reason as to why we saw this trek, I mean, from the 4th of Jan, 6 days is no mean feat. Do you think then they achieved what they wanted?
As we said earlier on, they are stated and unstated objectives.
Yes.
I don't know what they achieved, but at least it gave publicity. Because near every day of the walk, people were watching the walk and therefore profiling the image of the president.
Right.
And he was talking to the people. Definitely that is mobilizing for political support. Possibly that was achieved. But on the other hand, I saw on social media there are those who were critiquing the walk and giving various reasons why the walk took place and why maybe the people there have not achieved what they achieved. And just after the walk, I listened to the news, I think from NTV or NBS, the Nakaseke people critiquing him, NRM people, by the way, critiquing the president and saying that, you see, they are not the ones who have failed.
Right.
Maybe it is the central government which has failed. Of course, it was a veiled way of saying it is him who has failed them. So it could have achieved in some areas, it could have failed in some areas.
Now that you're speaking about what was unspoken in terms of the intended purpose, of course we'll be getting into that and breaking that down. What we saw, the other thing that we saw clearly was the president, His Excellency, giving out money to the elderly people that he met while on his trek. And the majority was saying that it's just a month from us coming from the anti-corruption walk. him standing up and saying that I'll be at the forefront of fighting corruption. Now, we've always been having, and just the other day, the CSOs were concerned that, you know, now that they're trying to put together the 2020-2021 budget framework, one of the key things will be, their worry is most of the allocation will go into the polls or the election or campaigning financing for 2021. Now, my question to you is, do you think him dishing out money to the elderly people while on his trek was a form of corruption or a form of voter bribery, what we call wooing people? Now that you're mentioning that one of the untold or unspoken reasons was for him to mobilize for 2021.
Well, in Uganda, there is some official practice, political practice, since NRM came into power. I don't know how to call it, but you see, there is a whole presidential vote for gifts. Call it the gifts vote. So that money must be part of the gifts vote. And I think I've heard some people talking about that it is in the region of 250 billion Uganda shillings,
right?
Which is quite a big money. What image was it showing? What was it creating in the minds of the people? That there is money there to dish out. Maybe government just prints money and dishes out, because it creates a certain image. Anyway, you are talking about corruption. I don't know whether to define that as corruption, but corruption has two types. There is bureaucratic corruption, mainly to do with embezzlement, and then there is political corruption, something to do with using state power or abusing state power for political support. And that one, you can't even take anybody to court. For example, that gift money is appropriated by parliament, so he has not committed any crime, corruption, so to speak. Corruption by the legal status of Uganda, right? Because the money for gifts was appropriated by parliament. But I think some people might argue that, by the way, why should there be appropriated public funds for gift giving? But
do you think he was contradicting himself? Because we always look, you know, last year, the conversation of corruption was very heavy. And experts were trying to track back corruption and where it starts, especially in public offices. And what came out critically is, fine, we are the ones who have set it out, especially us as the electorate, because what do we do if we want to give you our vote? We demand kitu kidogo. During the campaigning season, if you're a politician and you just pass through with a perfect, brilliant manifesto without something small, I won't even give you a listening ear. Now, they try to track it back, and they say that if we sort out how we are campaigning, if we sort out campaign financing, then we will be able to fight corruption to a certain great magnitude. Now, they were saying that a majority, actually, we also, the honorable who went to court because he borrowed money for elections, he was unable to pay for it, to pay back. Now, what happens, the phenomenon is these people borrow huge sums of money for them to have excellent campaigns. Of course, we know it's kitu kidogo. And then once they get to office, their first agenda is to recoup what they spent. And of course, how do they recoup? We all know their pay slips, but somehow they steal. They misappropriate some of these funds. So are we saying the president is not leading by example, and he's, you know, pretty much contradicting the strong message he left us with as we were closing 2019?
To put it broadly, we are talking about the political culture now.
Yes.
I think there is a challenge of a political culture that has emerged in Uganda. The vote purchasing or vote buying or using money in campaign financing, a lot of money, which has bedeviled the politics in Uganda. And this can give that impression that when you can buy political support, and you can buy the feelings of the people in order to support you. Right. Which has crept into our political arena, and that is very unfortunate, I think, and this must be reviewed, because when you just give out money, for example, if you are giving those envelopes and glaring in the public eye, first of all, What about those places where there are elderly people, poor people who did not have access to the president to get the money?
Exactly.
That's why the money should be institutionalized so that it is given out to all the people in the whole country, but not those who have had access to the president. So it can be looked at negatively, and it can send wrong signals to the public, to the public sphere, that you can use non-institutionalized money to anybody, even when he is in a desperate situation. I think those people are in a desperate situation, granted. But then what about those who cannot meet the president?
Right.
Why don't it be put in an institutionalized way so that there is access to it, broadly speaking? So that is a challenge, and you have talked about voter bribery and using money in campaigns, and we are going for campaigns. It is very unfortunate that this has crept into our politics, and therefore people are not going to look at the policies and policy alternatives that the politicians are talking about, but how much you can give.
Right.
And you know, peasants or ordinary people generally, they know that the opportunity for getting something from government is during elections.
Yes.
After elections, they have got high sense of survival. So let me get that something after all. Whomsoever I will vote in will go and look for his own benefits or our own benefits.
Right.
So that has vulgarized and bastardized politics in Uganda in such a manner that politics is not about alternative policies or policies and styles of leadership and human rights issues and good governance issues and nation building issues and state building issues, but it's just about playing around with material inducements,
right,
which would be unfortunate. So the president in that case was giving out money to the desperate people, which maybe anyone could give, but when it is given by a public figure in the glare of the media and people are looking at it, it can be, the message could be taken differently,
right,
that this is about the government giving out money.
Actually, I was following through with the social media comments coming through from Ugandans, and they were saying that it would have been different if it was someone from the opposition dishing out money like that. Well, in his defense, the president said that he was trying to give a token of appreciation to these elderly people for, of course, taking part in securing peace for the country. Of course, that we also backdating back to the 1980s. Now, let's move on and look at what he said was his objective of this particular trek. And we're going to break down a few 2-3 tips right here, and to see if at all that was achieved. Now, one, let me just read out what he said. He said, I want you to look at the history of the ones who were before you, who had a deeper understanding of what Africa needs, but also had the discipline to fight for it. He moved on to say that I also wanted to expose to you your country so that you see the potential in agriculture and tourism industry. Let's start with the first objective. Him saying that he wants us to have a deeper understanding of what Africa needs. In retrospect, we're looking at what Uganda needs. We all know what Uganda needs. This is going to be almost his 6th term in office, if elected 2021. Now, in my view, you have been in the space for quite a long time. Him saying that he wants us to have a deeper understanding of what we need. Do you think the NRM government has had that deeper understanding of what Ugandans need over its 3 decades in power, and have they delivered that? If so, to what extent?
Well, I think they understand what Uganda needs, and they have identified some of the needs of Uganda. But the question is, have they been implemented? You see, there is a problem of having very good policies, but not implementing them. The fun here, the humor here is that good policies are made in Uganda, perfected in Kenya, and implemented in Rwanda. I don't know about that.
Yes.
But that is what I hear in the general public. So the challenges are very many in Africa, of course. Like in the last decade, we were promised, for example, by the government that we would have a standard gauge railway. I don't know how far it has gone, that there would achieve middle income status. Definitely we have not done that.
And actually the target was 2020.
Here was 2020, yeah, that would have oil produced. I don't see the oil having produced. Even on the African level or the East African level, that would have a political federation. We have not had a political federation. So there are very many of those challenges that were issues that were identified, but have not been achieved. Others could be education. Yes, we have had maybe higher rates of enrollment, but the quality of education has definitely gone behind. By and large, I mean, if we look at the general GDP of Uganda, the general GDP of Uganda is about US dollars 30 billion as per last year. But remember, Kenya, for example, has gone beyond 90 billion US dollars.
Correct.
If we can compare with Tanzania, it is around 60 something billion, 66 or 60 billion US dollars. Our per capita income in Uganda is around, I think, 28, 27. 200, is it 28 billion? Not billion. 30 billion is the GDP.
Yes.
But the per capita income is about $750.
Right.
And that one of Kenya is about 2,000. And when we make that comparative study, you see we still have a long way to go. And even Rwanda, which has emerged out of war, if we go by the general official statistics, also its GDP per capita has gone to around 85 or 800, sorry, $825.
So what you're saying is that
comparatively in the region, you see, we're also not doing so well.
Right.
And yet we expected to do much more than we have done so far.
Speaking of us doing much more, you know, still in 2019, coining the corruption conversation to economic growth has been, what can we do to grow the country's economy? What can we do to ensure that this conversation of unemployment is sorted out? What can we do to mechanize agriculture? And it's interesting to see that the other critical reason the president said that he spearheaded this trek is for us to appreciate our strengths as a country. Number one, he said, agriculture to tourism. Can we now start with tourism and agriculture, of course, as we're looking at boosting our economy? But sadly enough, last year, when we looked at the budget allocation, these two areas, you're looking at, when you know where your strength is, then you invest more in that to give it more power for your growth. But that didn't happen of course, in the budget allocation that we also for 2019-2020. Now, I'll just read out some of the figures that we have so that you can break that down. In terms of tourism, now Uganda earned about 1.6 billion US dollars. When you break that down, that's about 5.8 trillion Uganda shillings, and that is in the financial year 2018-2019, because you have to get the current figures. Now, of course, that makes it the leading country's foreign exchange earner the 5th year in a row. That shows we have great potential in that area. But my question is, if we know where our strength is, I mean, we are called the Pearl of Africa. We have amazing tourism destinations. My first question will be, why is the president condoning such conversations like jeopardizing Murchison Falls, one? And two, why are we not seeing the much needed funding going into tourism if we are looking at it as our major stronghold?
First of all, I don't know where you got your statistics, but somebody told me, or I have read somewhere, that actually our biggest earner in the last 2 years is gold.
Now, this is coming from the World Bank. This is coming from the World Bank statistics from 2018-2019
earnings have been coming from gold, and also high export earnings have been from Nkubacheyos.
Okay.
But also tourism, but we need to do better in tourism. I think we are trying our best, and the tourism earnings are increasing. We probably need to invest more, especially in infrastructure towards the the tourism sites. But we need to develop also cultural tourism, because globally, the biggest earner in tourism is cultural tourism, not nature tourism. But we have got that comparative advantage in nature tourism, but we should add on cultural tourism and then improve on the infrastructure. But much more so again, we must also do something about security.
Yes.
Because when you Google and you want to tour Uganda and you see a lot of canisters of tear gas every day in Kampala, it can discourage you from coming to Uganda. Right. You may think that everybody is always inhaling tear gas. So we need to improve our image in respect of security. And to do that one, then we need to address the question of managing diversity. We are a diverse country, culturally, ethnically, religion, social classes. So we need to address the question of managing our diversity, not using force,
yes,
but using other means of persuasion or institutional arrangements that would be accommodating.
Mr.
We need to practice politics of accommodation,
yes,
and not intolerance.
And tolerance as well. But do you think that is going to be achieved, especially now in the heat of politics, as we know what has been happening to Bobi Wine and his consultations? So do you think that is going to be achieved, especially now that we have just a few months shy to 2021, and actually before that, the campaigning season? Do you think that is going to be achieved?
Impossible. It's not impossible.
Well, then what
it's
options
just a change of heart, a change of political policy, a change of direction in political policy. Once you become a statesman, the challenge is that we have politicians more than statesmen.
Correct.
They say politicians look at the next elections, statesmen look at the next generation. If we are going to build for the future, as Makerere motto says, to build the future that is conducive for Bazzukulu to thrive very well, then let's be statesmen. Let us accommodate. Let us have politics of diversity management. Diversity, of course, if you allow space for diversity to thrive, it can come with certain challenges. But again, managing it using force and this tear gas is going to affect our economy as it has affected it, because really, I think we should have done better than 300 billion US dollars.
Right.
But it can also affect the national integration.
Right.
This is a country that is diverse. This is a young country, 189 years old, since 1894, that needs to be pulled together, to be brought together, and therefore we need to come up with a model, a political governance model that manages diversity rather than suppressing diversity, coercing diversity, stifling diversity,
right,
and all other verbs that I could master to explain the politics of coercing diversity.
All right, and you know that has been a conversation about the whole thing of electoral reforms.
Yes.
Yet to be seen. Are you hopeful we have enough time for all that to be taken in, and do you think government has even the heart to hear that?
We are late, actually, because this should have been done yesterday. And there is even the parliament is going to debate the private members' motion that was supposed to address those ones.
Yes.
So you can see the will to have that managing diversity, to have that national consensus, I think is lacking. If the will was there, those laws should have been passed long ago.
Right. So
the issue here is not actually following the constitution. We have in Uganda a challenge, which actually the Jesus' statement in the Bible can express very well, that we have new wine in old bottles. And you know, when you have new wine in old bottles, the consequence for that.
Yes.
The new one here, which I'm referring to, is that we have got a liberal constitution that is supposed to respect diversity, rule of law, respect for the separation of powers, and things like that.
Right.
But on the other hand, we do have an administrative political system that curtails those freedoms.
All right.
So you have got new wine in old bottles.
Yes.
And when you have new wine in old bottles, definitely the wine will not thrive well.
Okay.
And the bottles can break. And therefore, we need to change so that we have new wine in new wine skins.
Moving from the tourism conversation, what you're critically saying is if that is not checked, the political intolerance that you've been seeing over the past few years is not checked, then tourism will suffer in the next few years.
It will definitely suffer. But I wanted to say that also tourism is not necessarily what we should concentrate on. If you asked me my opinion, assuming I was in charge of power,
yes,
my take on my position, economic position or development position would be concentrating on human development.
All right.
My human development should be the approach that we should be having, because once you have human development and you increase human capabilities and capacities, then everything else will be added into it.
All right.
Yes.
Human development.
Human development.
I do agree with you on that one. Now, the other conversation on agriculture. We're all waiting to see how much will go to agriculture this particular financial year that they're working on, 2020-2021. We're waiting to see on that one. But, you know, this is a conversation we can't exhaust.
No, but let me make a final comment on agriculture.
Yes.
People out there, listeners out there, should know that agriculture, by the way, is not the biggest contributor to the economy in terms of sectoral contribution to GDP. Agriculture contributes between 22 and 23% to GDP. The biggest contributor is now services, which contributes about 50%. Therefore, agriculture is not the biggest contributor, although agriculture feeds this country. So let there be no mistake to think that agriculture is the biggest sectoral contributor to the national economy. It is not.
Yes.
But we need to invest more in it, especially in terms of increasing productivity, not necessarily production.
Right.
Because our productivity in agriculture is decreasing at a high rate. Soils have been depleted. We don't use a lot of technology in agriculture. There are very many agricultural and animal husbandry diseases which need to be controlled.
All right.
So we need to increase our productivity in agriculture, not necessarily increasing production, but productivity.
All right. Many thanks, Mr. Mwambutse Ndebesa, for your comments right here. Thank you for making time, especially as we're looking at the figures coming through from 2019 in terms of the contribution to GDP from agriculture, that being 3,368.94. Of course, we're looking at UGX billion. Billion is the figure right there. All right. That's it for Kickstarter. Keep your views coming.